If you like weird and virtuoso heavy metal, then you've come to the right place because this is my top 5 best progressive metal albums of 2023. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, John Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's riff of the week. Before we jump into the top 5, allow me to set the parameters, please, shall we? If you caught my top 10 death metal albums of the year episode, link at the end, stay tuned for that, then you will have seen that several of those albums were also progressive. What can I say? I love progressive music. Bands from that list, like Fires in the Distance or Horrendous, they could easily top this week's list as well because of how progressive they are, but I felt that they fit better on a death metal list. And by that same token, Insomnium Anno 1696 could also easily top this week's list as a progressive album, but I felt it's really more melodic death metal with progressive elements, so we won't be having that one this week. And then next week, when we do the countdown of the best black metal albums, several of those will also be progressive. But those albums, I feel, will fit better on a black metal list. This week, it's going to be pure prog. Well, maybe one of the albums I pick might be an exception. You'll see. So let's get started then, shall we? Number 5, Witch Ripper, The Flight After the Fall. And there's really 2 takeaways between this episode and if you saw my best thrash metal of the year list. If you want to make it, just name your band something Ripper, Grave Ripper, Hell Ripper, and now we have Witch Ripper. All of these bands, well, they rip. And you also have to be really talented, but this band has got talent in spades. This one will probably be one of the weirder albums on any of my lists. It could be argued that this is more of a progressive space rock opera than it is metal. But then again, when you hear all of these killer riffs on this record mixed in with a lot of the early Mastodon style vocals, well, that just plants it firmly in the camp of metal. But don't get it twisted. The vocals don't all sound like Mastodon. They have the timbre and the groove of bands like Muse, while at the same time having that big arena bombast of something like Queen. And then they have like the quirky alternative pop rock melodic sense of something like Weezer, but then you throw in a bunch of really heavy riffs and screaming guitar solos. And I mean, what more do you really want? Number 4, Omnirod, The Amnesil Rise. This one was my album art of the week back in May, and if you look at the album art and then listen to the music, you'll see it is the absolute perfect cover for any record. It's this perfect mix of dreamy prog with menacing death metal. Just look at the album art. You've got this balloon, and it's going through like this foggy sky, but then it's being gripped by like these spider leg looking things coming out of the sky. And that description is exactly what this album sounds like. The vocals on this one have a sort of macabre carnival barker sort of feel, and then it just moves seamlessly into brutal false chord screams. And the music behind that is a really cinematic experience. It doesn't sound like songs that have verses and choruses, but rather more like transitions between a bunch of epic movements. It's really creepy and really heavy at the same time, and I absolutely love it. Number 3, Tesseract, War of Being. And let me just do a little mini rant before we jump deep into this one. As I was looking through the list of all the progressive metal albums that dropped this year, I don't know who decides what's prog and what isn't, but just because the guitars are djent doesn't make it prog. It's like Periphery said, djent is not a genre. But with that being said, of all the new and modern bands, Tesseract is one of my favorite because of their approach to djent, They just do it differently. After all the new metalcore bands completely wore out all of the gent tropes, I've gotten really picky about which bands I like that do it. If you look at Tesseract's music videos with the sci-fi samurai and the pilot flying through space, I think that's really a perfect visual representation of what the album sounds like. The music would be the perfect soundtrack in a movie where the hero is traveling dimensions between space and time, witnessing the fractal breakdown of reality. And I don't normally like for my metal singers to have really pretty and delicate voices, but the spacey and complex nature of the sound on this one, it really does fit and I like it. And of course, being that it's on this show, he does scream as well during the heavy parts. It's just the clean parts. The layers are so complex and the harmonies are so stacked. The guitar parts are so atmospheric and the bass might be the grooviest in the genre. I will not be surprised if I see Tesseract War of Being #1 on a lot of people's album of the year list. It's that good. Number 2, Thy Catapult with a Fool. This one could have easily have been on any of my lists. It could have been near the top of my best death metal of the year list. Next week, it could be near the top of my best black metal of the year list because it does each one of those things so well. But that's only a small part of what happens on this record. There's so much different excellence. And hence, that's why it's so near the top of my best prog metal of the year. Most of the riffs will seem pretty recognizable when they're just doing the heavy parts, but those are so often followed by European folk or dungeon synth. You're just as likely to hear a flute or a fiddle or fretless bass or even samples. This album is a journey. It never ventures into the pompous territory that a lot of prog does with its bread and butter riffs, but it always manages to surprise you. You have no idea what's coming next, and when the next passage comes, it's always a high level of brilliance, just like the last. And the #1 prog album of the year is The Anchorite. It all began with loneliness. Yet another one of my album art of the week winners. I guess prog bands just make the best album art. I'm not sure, but what I am sure about is if you're a fan of Pink Floyd, Opeth, and Rivers of Nile, well, you obviously have great taste, but also this is the perfect record for you. It's got the complexity of Opeth, David Gilmour-like guitars, then throw in a bunch of saxophone and woodwind instruments and all that's great. Y'all know I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. But what really impresses me about this band is how they're able to keep me engaged for the entirety of the hour-long record. They are masters of arrangements, and each subsequent section just moves me. It's prog, so there's a lot of solos for all the instruments. I'm talking synth, I'm talking guitar, I'm talking about all the wind instruments, lots of solos. But at no point did it feel like one of the players was going, okay, now it's time for my solo. Each solo means something, and each one builds on the next, where the next one provides lift yet again. And then the vocals come in, and it soars to one crescendo after the other, and it just runs you through a gamut of emotions, and at the end you're just feeling like, wow. It's like after sex, when you plop down on the bed next to your partner and you just stare at the ceiling. Whatever that feeling is, that's the feeling you get when the last note of this record plays. Opeth, Rivers of Nile, and now with this debut album, you can count The Anchorite amongst my all-time favorite progressive metal bands. It's the passion, you can hear that they mean it. Every note. And I think that that's the common thread amongst all of these 5 very different bands. I didn't pick any show-off bands. The bands that go, look how good we can play. Look how many esoteric scales we know. Look at these odd time signatures we play in. Look how classically trained our singer is with his operatic falsettos. That doesn't move me. And don't get me wrong, I'm a guitar player, so I love a good guitar solo as much as the next guy. But there's a reason why David Gilmour is my favorite guitar player and not Yngwie Malmsteen. I'm only gonna pick what moves me. And speaking of what moves me, don't forget, as the episode closes, you'll hear this week's riff of the week. But before we do that, I want to tell you about next week. Next week will be the penultimate episode in our Album of the Year series, and we're counting down the best black metal of 2023. And thank you to Special Ed 2461 for correcting me last time I used that word wrong. Penultimate means the second to the last. So next week is going to be the second to the last episode in the Album of the Year. We're doing black metal, and then we're doing the final overall Album of the Year for 2023. But tell me what you think about these bands that I picked. What was your favorite progressive metal albums of the year? And for this week's riff of the week, I'm picking No Spoon with Earworm, because that was another band that I was thinking about for this week's episode. Another great progressive album called Opus. Really good stuff. So I want to shout that out for the riff of the week. And if you missed my top 10 best death metal albums of the year episode and you're on YouTube, you can just click right here, link in the description for you audio only listeners. But most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.